I'm a cartographer and a grad student at Penn State. I think I'm the only cartographer here, which is kind of exciting. So, like all grad students, I put in a really ambitious abstract, and this talk is going to be quite a bit narrower than what I planned. So, this will be kind of an examination of maps of Germany before, during, and after World War II. And I'll be comparing to America pre-World War II, and then between East and West Germany, and then after reunification. Okay. So first I have to thank my advisor, Dr. Cindy Brewer and Dr. Holdsworth on my committee and the Maps Library at Penn State, who did a lot of large format scanning for me at the very last minute, like 2 days before I left. So they were pretty awesome. Okay. So this is a delightful quote by Albert Kepler. I loved it, so I had to include it. But what does this have to do with typography and national identity? Well, he obviously recognized that type is powerful, and type is more than just ink on a page, it has a meaning. And to explain briefly, this is my not so rigorous academic methodology, which is cool when you do historical cartographic analysis because you don't have to be very rigorous. For once, I don't have to deal with p-values. So in the traditional semiotic model, the triad model, you have the signifier, which is the pixels, the actual ink on a page. The physical symbols, so that would be the style of the typeface, the box classification, the weight, what have you. And then you have the signify, which is what the type stands for. In a map, that would be the toponym or the place name. The sign unites these into an actual symbol on a map, which means if you see Amsterdam on a map, then you think of Amsterdam, the physical place. And so the sign includes both the physical ink or pixels and the place behind that name. So what we call a map label is actually a sign. And to go a little bit further, each sign is actually a signifier itself within a greater system. So the sign Amsterdam has a further connotation, maybe red light district or great typographic design, pot, whatever. Sorry. Flashing back to earlier visits to Amsterdam in my youth. So when you posit type and cartographic design as a sign system, then you can query the map as a cultural or socio-political landscape. So the design and existence of a map of toponyms can tell us about the zeitgeist. And type does not exist in a vacuum, obviously, neither does cartographic design. And the other thing I want to mention very quickly is that in a map, type is not just about how names are displayed, but what is mapped and what is labeled. So which toponyms are chosen to appear or disappear silently off the map. Very quickly, this is just an example. This is a map of one of those national parks in the US. I think it's near Yellowstone. So the type for the hydrography is assigned here because it's in blue, it's a lighter weight, it matches the symbol of the river, and it's a bit pushed into the background. The bigger focus is kind of on, here's the city of Rexburg, and then this type signifying the mountains is bold and black and stretched out for the whole mountain range. So this is just a quick example of how type is a sign. Okay, so how do I link all these three together? Well, some work has been done by people much more well-known than I am. The Minnesota Center for the Book Arts has a lovely online exhibit about typography establishing national identity and reinforcing it. Just go ahead and Google them and you can find their website. You might be familiar with the slim volume by Peter Bain and Paul Shaw, hopefully he's here, about typography in service of the state, specifically with black letter and the Nazis. And so here's kind of a grisly example of that for the Hitler Youth, I film. This is also another example of typography in service of the state. These are street signs in Nazi-occupied Paris. Obviously, Parisian street signs look nothing like this. This is a German typeface. And this is kind of an insidious way of establishing a hierarchy that Germany is occupying Paris, Germany is in charge here. So you'd never see a street sign like this in Paris except by the Germans occupying it. So I think that's very sinister and a subtle way of establishing that hierarchy. And finally, this delightful little paper by Carol Lersini at the Bad Type conference at St. Bride's in 2004, they discussed typography in the German Democratic Republic after the war, and that type was sort of subservient to ideological constraints, economic restrictions. East Germans didn't have access to equipment or couldn't buy licenses for some of the official fonts. So they had to come up with their own typographic tradition, and that
we'll see some of that, I think, in the maps that I'm going to show you. So when we think of type in the cartographic semiotic sense, type works in tandem with the map design to redefine or reinforce national identity, to persuade people to establish things as fact. And maps can tell us something about the environment in which that map was made. Okay, so these next two maps are for Lawrence Penny, who I actually did not know before this conference, so this is a little bit serendipitous. This is the heading of a beautiful little strip map drawn in 1922 of the Elbe River, and I love this. I think this is hand-drawn, pre-engraving. The type on the map itself, I believe, is set in metal. I'm not a type historian, so good. But I think this is just gorgeous. It's very sort of relaxed. The map itself is very bucolic and leisurely. There are pictures of people in these little pleasure boats kind of going down the Elbe. So to me, this is kind of emblematic of Germany was starting to come out of an economic slump post-World War I, and there's a little bit of a Roaring '20s feel to the culture at that time. So let's contrast that to America. This is from the same year, the Lone Star route, and it goes from the very tip of Texas to Chicago. And I think this is just an absolutely terribly boring map, and it's very no nonsense. There's actually quite a mix of typefaces on here, which. But I think this is what trade Gothic or news Gothic, and it's just, to me this says Americans are very serious about their tourism. We will drive all the way from the tip of Texas to Chicago, and don't even bother looking at what's around it. Those are just for reference. In the strip map of the Elbe, you're kind of invited to go into the countryside, and in this map it is about the getting there.
The towns along the way, and get yourself to Chicago or Texas, and don't worry about anything in the middle. Moving on to World War II, actually 1937, so just before the Nazi aggression was ramping up. I think this kind of the most prominent example of type is down here. Hopefully you can see it. This is sort of almost black letter before the Nazis really started pushing black letter as the official typography of the Third Reich. Mark Monmonier is a famous cartographer, and he dug up actually a document of Nazi restrictions on cartographic production somewhere in the Library of Congress, I believe. And he wrote that in these rules, areas lost in 1919 under the Treaty of Versailles, German names are to be printed in a bold type, and local names in smaller type or parentheses. Bilingual labeling became standard for cities and towns, but it was acceptable to use only the German version when space was tight on a small scale map. And only the German toponym was attached to countries, larger provinces, the seas, and local mountain ranges. So there's another example of type kind of reinforcing or pushing German authority. All right, so this is the American map of World War II. This is just the most bizarre map projection ever. This is called Blockade of Fortress Europe. And there's this string of Soviet hammers and sickles across here, and I don't know if you can see it, but there are little battleships here in the ocean. And so the whole effect is to show that we have got, the Germans surrounded, and, we're going to beat them. And this is kind of actually a similar idea to what the Germans had in their map. This is trying to show Germany surrounded. All these countries have all these armed forces, and of course, it makes sense for Germany to go to war. We have to protect ourselves. And so this is kind of the American version of that same sentiment. And to me, the sickles are glyphs. That's not a map symbol, obviously. And so while there's no words in it, the type is very schoolbook, no nonsense. That, to me, is still an interesting application of type on a map. I just you'd never do that in a map, but this is propaganda, so hey, it's okay. All right, so now we are after the war. This is after all the cartography companies were nationalized in East Germany. Carruthers and you talked about the East Germans having to reuse type and maybe use older type, and I think that is what's going on here. This still looks pretty typical for 1950s maps, at least as far as I know. I was alive back then. And you can't really tell that there's a border between East and West Berlin. It's almost not visible. There's actually a purple line right here, but it's before the wall was built, so it wasn't really a big deal. The one thing I would say is that Berlin is not yet East and West Berlin.
there's just Berlin, but of course the toponym here is anchored on the east side, and the west side is kind of given short shrift. And that's the way it goes. West Germany, not nationalized. It's another tourist route map. And again, this includes the border of the country, but it's not really, this is just a border of a country. The focus here is on the route, so it's not immediately obvious that it's a big deal to cross into the other country. And the border of West Berlin is hidden behind the Autobahn. So again, the border, not so important here. The West Germans seem to be a little bit more lax about setting their type. So it's still Berlin, it's not east and west. And Berlin's just sort of stuck there, in fact, on the east side. So this is another official map from East Germany. This I think is where you're starting to sort of see maybe economic restrictions. There's a whole mix of typefaces on here, which I think is really sort of horrible. I don't even know what they all are. But you see one here, some here, there's one here, and I think this is a different one. And then there's this one. So maybe that's a symptom of economic distress, just a lack of good designers perhaps, but it's certainly not the greatest map. Unfortunately I didn't get one of Berlin in this map series, but this is the border of the country, and this is kind of interesting. So there are towns here. They definitely existed during this time, but everything stops at the border. And railroad spurs sort of stop in the middle of nowhere. There is a town here, and they're just sort of left it off the map. It doesn't exist. All right, another East German map. We're using typefaces. We saw this in the previous series. Here's Berlin. Now, you see the border. It is purple, and it's got big hash marks. And now it is West Berlin and Berlin, another interesting way of treating the toponym. So West Berlin is just, and this is Berlin. East Berlin is just Berlin. I love this map because it's hilarious. Do not believe this is Helvetica, and those of you probably, I think the proportions are a little bit off, so to me, I think that's another example of a coffee that was made with Helvetica, because they didn't have Helvetica. There's no West Berlin here at all. There's not even a name for it. It's totally gone. And you see that both in this map and this map, and I find that really interesting. And again, Berlin is Berlin. It's not east and west. It's just, this is Berlin. Don't mind the man behind the curtain. There's nothing there. So, a little bit interesting. All right. West Germany, another tourist map. This is a map of camping sites. It's also a map of routes. Now we're seeing official typefaces. This is Helvetica. I believe this is Optima, or whatever it was called back then. And then there's a third typeface I can't identify. But here's the border. It's really faint. It's just dotted. It almost gives you a suggestion that the border is permeable, which it certainly really wasn't. But the focus is just, it's sort of gone. So those previous maps of East Germany were tourist maps, they're route maps. And this is also a tourist map, but the border is just, And here's the border of the country. You probably don't even see it until I point it out. And you'd think that for people who are hiking in the countryside of Germany that you want to sort of show the border, right? You don't really want to cross the border. Kind of run into trouble if you do, but no, it's really faint. The important typographic treatment here, besides the fact that it's in West German and they're using fonts that are official, is that the Bundesrepublik is set in a larger point size than the Deutsche Demokratische Republik. So very subtle, establishing a hierarchy though. Okay, so post-reunification, I'm just going to show you two quick maps. So this is a tourist map. The wall here, this is pretty much getting out into the international style, is what I call, of maps. And so it's pretty standard. This is similar to most tourist maps made about this time in 2000. Sorry about that little, that's meant to say 2000. So here's a close-up, and here's the wall. Now it's just a tourist attraction, but now we need to keep it on here. It's a historical oddity. It's also a tourist destination, and it's important to remember history. So now we have the wall, but it's a little bit different. It's no longer this, here's the wall, and you cannot cross it. Unfortunately, this is the official topographic map series by the BKG. I didn't have access to the one of Berlin, So my conclusion is a little bit not quite as strong as it could be. But I find this fascinating. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the Swiss topographic maps. They're iconic. And they use a serif font.
There's no sans on the Swiss maps, at least until recently. And so you're seeing the same thing here. The only typographic distinctions are size, weight, and italics,
or Roman. And I find this fascinating because this is, to me, this is the BKG, this is the official state map series. This is conveying a different kind of national identity than what we've seen previously. So the use of a serif font conveys authority, kind of historical authenticity, and maybe that's intentional, kind of trying to erase maybe some of the past and posit Germany is very serious and very solid, kind of imitating the Swiss maps almost. So if anyone's here from the BKG, which I sort of doubt, please talk to me afterwards if I have it totally wrong. So I'm going to leave you with a final quote by Albert Kapper again, because I loved it. To sum up, very briefly, type is an emblem of the national and cultural landscape when it's part of a map and it's a sign system. It's part of this cartographic imagery, which can be in service of the state or the nation state, and it helps to establish, reinforce, or sometimes subvert state identity. And whether that's commercially or officially and on purpose or not, it's always there. There's always a meaning to the type and to the design. So I want to just finally say I think that there is a Gestalt effect going on between the map design and the typographic design. They cannot be separated. They sort of become part of that same cartographic image. And these design choices speak very loudly about the design and cultural climate, and cultural, sometimes national differences, which I believe show up in maps. So where do I go from here? This was just a fun little
side project of mine, but this is where my dissertation picks up, and I'm going to be looking at type and national identity in official national map series, and trying to work at the intersection of legibility, emotional response to design, and identity in cartographic design. That's all.
We're going to break for lunch now, and we can see you back here at 1 for the type fit or at 2 for Dan.